Welcome to Spiritual Psychology. My name's Renee LaValle McKenna, and I bring my 30-plus years as a recovering addict and ex-crazy person turned therapist and shamanic healer to bring you snackable teachings on spirituality, psychology, and all things personal growth. And today I want to talk about God, and specifically the idea of God as Father. I rarely use the word God these days because it's such a complex term that means so many different things to different people. Many of my clients have been harmed by organized religion. Many acts of violence, exclusion, and persecution are done in the name of God worldwide, and the term has just been generally corrupted for many people. And although most great religious and spiritual traditions point to the unknowable infinite, oneness of which we are all a part, that tiny little three-letter word means vastly different things if you're a Southern Baptist, a Reformed Jew, or a Jehovah's Witness. Words are incredibly powerful, and our ability to use language allows us to conceptualize, to discuss, and to think about things in complex and evolving ways. One of the first things Adam gets to do in the book of Genesis in the Bible is name stuff. And it's important to remember that the word is not the thing itself. The word points to the thing and holds our concept of it. And language is constantly growing and evolving. I have teenagers, and it's pretty fun to try to keep up with the ever-morphing lingo like fat and stacked. Fat means that something's excellent, and stacked means that someone is rich. And I think it's quite healthy that many people are wrestling with or rejecting the spiritual and religious concepts that were spoon-fed to them and seeking that which feels more authentic to their own needs and experience. Could be seen as kind of a mass spiritual evolution, a kind of adolescence, growing from being a well-behaved child who just takes what they are given into a place of questioning and seeking a deeper truth for themselves. And we are actively creating and developing new paradigms in most areas of life: how we connect and communicate, how we receive and share information, how we work, where we live, and the structure of our friendships and society at large. And it just makes sense that we would be evolving spiritually as well. I've been listening to some lectures by Buckminster Fuller. I fucking love this man. Oh my God. He's one of the most brilliant minds of the 20th century. He was an architect, a scientist, and a mystic. He has this incredibly unique and positive perspective on life. And Bucky was born in 1895 and died in 1983. And humans have been on this planet in one form or another for somewhere around 3 million years. And the last 100 or so years has seen more exponential change than any period of time before. He traveled the world lecturing and designing buildings and spaces. And in this particular talk, he said he had circumnavigated the world 37 times. And we think nothing these days of flying to Europe or Hawaii, if you're lucky. I have friends who go home to India every year. And he talked about when he was a little child, his father imported leather for the shoe business in New England. And the two places he imported from were Venezuela and India. And a trip to South America took 2 months each way. And a trip to India took 3 months each way. And very few people could afford that amount of time. And there were very few ships that could take you. When he was 7, the Wright brothers flew for the first time just a little over 100 years ago, and engineering societies across the globe tried to prove it was a hoax because everyone knew that man couldn't fly. He heard the first radio broadcast, was involved in some of the first television programs in the experimental studios of the Columbia Broadcast System in New York City. He didn't live to see an iPhone or the internet, but Mr. Fuller did get to watch us move from a system of isolated villages and cities and countries, incapable of much, if any, correspondence with the outside world, into a worldwide web of instant connection. I had a WhatsApp text string with a friend in Switzerland this morning, And even in my own life, I went to college before there were personal computers and typed most of my papers on a typewriter with whiteout and carbon paper. The school library had a card catalog, and there was no Google to look things up on. And there is a creative, intelligent design happening here. The planets revolve around the sun in complex patterns. They don't crash into each other. The laws of physics and chemistry work in synergy with each other in unfathomable complexity that not only creates the vast array of gorgeous ecosystems in cities that exist across the planet, but the very nature of this larger consciousness system is to evolve and grow. And we're in a time of immense change, moving from an old way of being into a brand new one, like a brown, seemingly lifeless seed that suddenly sprouts roots and stems, grows leaves. And change makes people nervous. Is the seed going to turn into an oak tree or poison ivy? And learning to navigate uncertainty is imperative, because what is coming is undetermined. It has not been created yet. And for many people, the God of the Old Testament and even the New Testament may feel like an unreliable or antiquated resource. But rejecting the God of our forefathers does not mean that we don't have spiritual needs. And having our spiritual needs met can be just as important as eating well, exercising, having a place to live, and people to love and be loved by. In fact, for me, my spiritual needs underlie all of those things because the material world and my experience of it stands upon and arises from this infinitely generative and creative life force, which is also known as God. And I have to say, the word God has never really worked for me. Much of Judeo-Christian lore is not particularly generous to women, especially not to drug-addicted ex-bar sluts like myself. And the whole idea of God the Father felt very lame to me for much of my life. Probably because my own father, sweet as he was a pretty impotent and passive person who was not able to show up for me when I really needed him. And it's not unusual, although it's generally unconscious, that people's experience with their own parents is projected onto their perception of God. It can be quite informative to look deeply at your emotional expectations of the divine and see if they correlate in any way with your experience of your parents. Is God a distant figure that doesn't really care or is too busy to spend any effort caring for me? Is God punishing, judgmental, have expectations that can never be reached? Is God loving, forgiving, compassionate? Or is the whole God thing a fantasy created by the insecure to try to make themselves feel better? So the idea of God as Father never worked for me. Some dude on a cloud chucking lightning bolts at fallen women like myself. I had a difficult and distant relationship from my mother, and my first experience or conception of a higher power was through nature. The wind, the moon, again, that life force that takes a dead seed and makes it grow. How does that happen? I have a bunch of succulents on my kitchen windowsill, and one of my favorites has thousands of tiny leaves, and some of the leaves dropped off. They're smaller than a pinky fingernail, and a few of them fell behind the pot. And when I cleaned the windowsill recently, those little leaves that fell off the plant and had been laying there untouched had grown roots. They had no water, no dirt, but the force of gravity informed the life force that still existed in those disconnected leaves, and they were smart enough to grow roots. And that life force which permeates all things is connected to me. It causes my cells to metabolize, my food to digest, my lungs to breathe, my heart to beat without my thinking about it. And when I sit in nature and look deeply at what's happening around me, I am part of an unimaginably intelligent living system that has my highest good in mind, as it does for all living things, and the highest good of the larger system, which includes death. And I experience that presence as a loving, compassionate, feminine force we might call the Great Mother. Earth is often referred to as Mother. And as I have grown in relation to that life force, it has healed my mother wound and created in me the ability to be a loving mother myself, not just with my own children, but to the larger community and my students and clients as well. And like I said, words are powerful. And one of the first things I played around with was to pray our mother rather than our father. If you were raised or wounded by Christianity, I encourage you to experiment with our mother who art in heaven. Hallowed be thy names, for there are many names for that which some call God. Great Spirit and Spirit of the universe have been central terms for me many times. I'm continually looking for language to describe that which is undescribable. So terms like the life force or the larger consciousness system have become recent favorites because I had some students who really struggled with the gender thing in relation to source. And in my own continuing spiritual evolution, after having prayed goddess for over 30 years, I'm being called back into relationship with the divine masculine myself. As many of you know, I love Hindu cosmology because of the balance of masculine and feminine it provides, and the wisdom of honoring the creative, erotic, life-forming union of masculine and feminine working together. The masculine often seen as the non-physical or the metaphysical, and the feminine often being seen as the physical or material reality. And just like a man and a woman come together to make new life in a baby, the masculine and feminine principles of the cosmos come together as the creative evolutionary force. So as I've kind of resolved my own internalized misogyny and embraced the empowered feminine, it's time to bring more balance to that perspective and discover and incorporate a more mature and accurate divine masculine as her consort. Maybe it's her husband, but I've been divorced twice, so we'll keep it as a boyfriend for now. And many people, as they come more maturely on their own spiritual path, naturally or spontaneously come to exactly what they need, that God meets them where they are. And many find this masculine-feminine balance very nourishing and spiritually supportive. I have a long-term client, very advanced practitioner, who has Jesus and Mary as primary guides. And they always show up together. One is on the left, one is on the right, and she has a spirit guide in animal form and the element of water. And whenever we do inner work, that's the configuration that calls her in. And she calls that her spiritual family. Like many of us, myself included, her biological family was imperfect at best. And the elements of her spiritual family provide for her what her human family could not. We did a really powerful session this week. She's feeling particularly frustrated about work and living circumstances and some issues with her husband and her child. And she was reminded by the water, by her spirit guide, by Mary and Jesus, that attaching herself and looking for fulfillment through people, places, and things is the path of insecurity. And to ground herself spiritually first. And that spiritual connection, whether we call it God, Mother Earth, universal life force, or Buddha nature, finding the wording that is most accurate, helpful, or meaningful to us, regardless of what we call it, it is always available. The ground of being, the collective ocean of consciousness in which we all swim. Often we are like waves in the sea that don't know we're part of the water. And that's the work. Thank you so much for listening. Working on my digital course, Intro to Shamanism, should be releasing this fall. Very powerful and direct way to access the spirit of nature directly. If you want to get a free download of the first chapter of my book, Allies and Demons, Working with Spirit for Power and Healing, there's a link in the show notes. And check me out on Instagram. I'm posting new art every day. It's so exciting and helpful for me to have a reason to draw. It's at spiritual_psychology, spelt like this podcast. And if you have a minute to give me 5 stars and a good review, I'd really appreciate it. Moves the podcast up in the rankings and allows more people to find it. And if you want to find out how spiritual psychology might benefit you in your life or learn more about my mentorship program, shoot me an email, info@reneemckenna.com. Always grateful to my supporters on Patreon. And blessings on your path until we meet again. This is Renee LaValle McKenna for Spiritual Psychology.